Okay, hi Nigel. Thank you very much for joining me today. It's been, a very long time since we last spoke.
It has.
And for anyone who doesn't know who Nigel is one of the directors for the Practice Plan Group. And today we're going to be talking about, we're doing a review, aren't we, really, of the year, looking back at dentistry in 2022 and kind of where we see it going in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is a very big question to start off with, but how has dentistry been this year? Looking back over 2022, how would you kind of summarise the dental industry, dental profession?
Well, I think it's been going through some of the most amazing amounts of change that I've ever seen during the course of my career. I mean, I spent many years working with the dental profession, and I can't remember a period of time where there has been this amount of change and uncertainty for it. I think obviously a lot of that is down to the pandemic and the turbulence that was caused leading up to the beginning of this year. But some of the issues are sort of longer term and are sort of really coming to a head around nowish as well. So I think it's been it's been an absolutely fascinating year, really. And that the danger with me saying that is that I'm trivialising some of the immense pressure that some people have definitely been under during the course of it. I mean, right the way through the dental profession, practice teams and patients, I think, have been feeling it quite a bit this year. But I think there's been some good things and some bad things that have happened throughout the year. And overall, I retain sort of a lot of optimism for the future for dentistry, which might kind of sound like I'm swimming against the tide a little bit there, because I know there's a lot of doom and gloom around. But actually, I feel quite positive about the future.
I think that's an interesting point you make there. I think it's quite easy to get caught up in what's going on at the moment. I mean, it's changing weekly, really, isn't it? I mean, the political turmoil we've had this year and the economic changes that are taking place, it casts a lot of the future into question for many people, both at a professional and a personal level too. But what do you mean by that then? So in dentistry, say, you've got a positive outlook going forward. What is it about what's going on at the moment that makes you take that view?
Well, I suppose, I mean, one of the main things that for me has characterised this year from a dental perspective is actually probably something we touched on the last time we spoke, which is the imbalance in the supply of dentistry and the demand for dentistry. And I think that creates a whole host of challenges and issues. But I also think that what it does create for the dental profession is it puts them in a position of strength to be able to shape their careers and their practices in a particular way. I mean, as a very specific example, you hear more and more reports at the moment of dentists setting up new private squat practices and filling their books in a matter of weeks. Now, not that long ago, certainly pre-pandemic, that would have seemed like a pipe dream, whereas now it's happening all the time. So I think that demonstrates that there is a position of strength that the profession has. I mean, I also have to be careful there. I've got to caveat that with the fact that if you're in an NHS practice working in an area of high deprivation, it's been a really challenging year. And I think there isn't a huge amount of light at the end of the tunnel unless you do something like set up a private squat. But I think that in the main, it's the supply-demand thing's been helpful for the profession. It's brought with it a lot of pressure. I mean, you look at all the coverage there's been throughout this year about waiting lists, and I see both NHS and private practices turning off their marketing because they can't cope with the level of demand that's coming their way. I mean, I know we've got the cost of living crisis and we're heading into a recession, so that there is a chance that demand might dampen a little bit. And particularly, I think for cosmetic dentistry, straight to whiter teeth, we might see that soften. But I don't think the supply issues are going to be fixed anytime soon. And that although the demand might reduce, it's still not going to reduce below the level of supply that we've got. And if you look at some of the issues that affect supply, we've obviously had Brexit is part of it. We've been relying on European dentists to plug the gap in terms of the number of dentists that we train every year versus what we actually need, and that hasn't been happening since Brexit kicked in. we've got more and more people going part-time, whether that's as part and parcel of work-life balance and raising a family, or whether that's because people just don't think they can work at the intensity that they used to, so they're working on a more part-time basis clinically. I think there's been a lot of disillusionment with the NHS, and that has led to an increase in early retirements, has led to more dentists going private. And when they go private, I mean, we do this all the time. We're helping dozens of dentists at any given moment across the UK go private. They rarely want to improve their income. They mostly want to see fewer patients and maintain their income. But by virtue of the fact they're seeing fewer patients, that means other patients are being added to the waiting list of other people. So that demand supply thing, as people go private, is going to be maintained. And I think, like I say, overall, that generally puts the profession in a position of strength. But where I think it gets really difficult is if you're the owner of an NHS practice, particularly in, say, England, where you have a cap on your income, then trying to retain associates and keep them out of the clutches of the private practices that can offer maybe a better take home, better conditions, a better pace of working, is getting increasingly difficult. And I think, we see this all the time with dentists, practice owners approaching us saying, I'm going to have to go private because I simply can't recruit NHS associates at the moment. So I think it comes with pressures, but the fact is those practices can, in the main, go private very successfully at the moment because of the level of demand from patients.
Yeah, I can see that in conversations I'm having with other people as well. And I mean, even just listening to you there, you touched on so many things. I can't get over how much has happened in the last few years. You're mentioning the recruitment issues, you mentioned Brexit, you mentioned the pandemic. It's all just, sometimes I think everybody needs to pat themselves on the back to even just to sort of come out the other side of this. Although obviously now, like you said, we are heading into a recession, so we've got another challenge to come up against. But I mean, you guys at Practice Plan, you're very well positioned to kind of, you're very in touch with what the key issues are in dentistry at the moment because of these conversations you're having with people who may want to go private for the sake of their mental health, their well-being, their work-life balance. So what you said that work-life balance is a key driver there. So is this something that people are feeding back to you when you're having these conversations?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's I don't think we ever underestimate the damaging effect actually that the pace of work, particularly for NHS dentists, it has on their mental health. I was in an NHS practice only 3 weeks ago where I think there were two practice owners. One was halfway through a 12-hour clinical shift, and the other one had seen 30 patients that morning. And immediately people all wince at the thought of 30 patients, because how do you communicate effectively with that many patients in a single morning? How do you just cross-infection control could use up the time that you can allocate there? So, but you see this sense of real pressure. Trying to meet the requirements of the GDC, trying to avoid complaints, litigation, all of that takes careful communication, adequate communication, and relationship building, rapport building, all of those sorts of things. And yet that gets compromised by the ever quickening treadmill of NHS dentistry. And people are torn between those two things. So that's what I mean when I say that people don't tend to go private to increase their income. I mean, for an awful lot of them, that can happen, but that's not the main objective. The main objective is to step off the treadmill, work at a slower pace, and just feel better. And that's, it's still one of the joys of what I do is the fact that you take people that thought they were disillusioned with dentistry, and then you help them realise they were just disillusioned with NHS dentistry, and actually they still love it. Yeah. It's a brilliant profession. They can do so much good, have so much impact on patients' lives, and it's immensely satisfying from my point of view to be able to help people do that. But you're right. I think the mental health point is something we mustn't underestimate, because the mental health of the profession coming into the pandemic wasn't great, and because of that volatility that you described before, it's a lot of people are struggling still.
Yeah. I think we've had, well, from my point of view, speaking to dentists over the last few months, obviously it's unsurprising. I think that people are still feeling very overwhelmed by working within the NHS. I've heard some quite awful stories about sort of people coming face to face with patients who are having to take quite drastic measures just to afford dentistry at the moment, and I think people are finding it harder and harder to kind of listen to these within the NHS and kind of deliver the right care within their own, without compromising their own well-being, if that makes sense. Finding that balance between delivering care to the patients and looking after themselves. I think that line is very difficult to sort of keep between the two and walk that tightrope.
Oh, I think you touch on such an important point there, Gabby, that I think it can feel at times as if the government, successive governments actually, various persuasions, have relied on the social conscience of dentists to prop up NHS dentistry. Yeah. And that's fine to a point, but it definitely is taking its toll. And I am very concerned about some people, and you know, it's not fair to put them, I don't think, in this position where they have to take responsibility for what to me seems a system that's failing, rather than them as individuals failing their patients. But it's very difficult. You know, a practice I was speaking to just recently who know that, I mean, you can see how you know, for want of a better word, battered they feel. And they know that there is an escape route into private dentistry, but they just don't want to let their patients down, and they don't want the confrontation with their patients. They don't want to go into the local supermarket and be harangued for having gone private. It puts them off. But you know, it's an immense amount of pressure. I mean, that sort of turbulence tends to be temporary, and then they come out the other side and there's a huge amount of relief. But you can understand why people that are already tired get put off at that sort of thought. And it worries me that that's what maybe... I mean, see, the NHS should be a place people want to work in, not a place that they feel trapped about to work in. And certainly I think at the moment, I mean, there's no sign of substantial contractual reform that will make it an attractive place. There's no sign of additional funding that will make it an attractive place. Interesting, I think, some of the news that has come out recently from NHS Scotland, where they are debating what sounds like a kind of means-tested approach to the NHS, whether or not the wealthy will pay to support a system for the less well-off. That to me, I think, signals a direction of travel that will be hard to resist, and that I think lends itself to a very interesting time coming up over the next 2, 3, 4 years as the NHS as a whole, let alone the dental part of it, reshapes itself. Yeah, absolutely. I think you mentioned a few things earlier that well, I asked you sort of how are you feeling about the dental landscape at the moment. You said there is actually, despite everything, quite a lot that is optimistic, quite a lot to kind of look forward to in the future. So what positives can you draw from this year? And let's go into a bit more detail with that. What is there that is attractive about dentistry at the moment? Kind of what is quite hopeful? Well, I think that that level of demand, and you know, acknowledge the fact that could come under pressure because of the cost of living crisis and the recession. But that level of demand, I think, shows two things. Shows a degree of confidence in the dental profession. I think people have realised during the course of the pandemic how much they value dentistry and their oral health and their dentist and their practice. And that sort of prioritisation that we see going on is I think, immensely reassuring. Despite the fact people are already in a cost of living crisis, I look at what's happening in our business, and our business is growing quite steadily and quite well. So I think that shows to me that a lot of people are prioritising dentistry, which I think is a source of satisfaction for the profession, or should be. I think that those supply issues, as I touched on before, put the dental profession in a position of strength, depending on your specific location. But I think people can dream big at the moment in terms of how they want to shape their practices, what type of practice they want, what type of patients they want. So I think there's some real positives there. I know that there's lots and lots of negativity around NHS dentistry, as we've been touching on earlier on. But I do think it's been incredibly reassuring to see how much political debate has been held in the House of Commons this year just about dentistry, and that's been driven by, I think, the waiting list situation, the dental deserts, the coverage by the BBC, all the work that the BDA have been successfully doing to raise awareness of the challenges, and the very fact that dentistry is spoken about so much nowadays by politicians can only be a good thing, albeit I don't see any evidence it's going to translate into anything other than a reshaping of NHS dentistry and prioritising the most vulnerable. But because I think there's a financial reality, there isn't the money there to really make a comprehensive dental service for the NHS. But I think all those sorts of things for me are positives, that's why when you look longer term, you have to be looking at a future that's dominated by private dentistry. I mean, there's nothing earth-shattering in what I've said there, but I think it's pretty clear that we're moving closer and closer to a time of what might be called a core service or a defined service, and then that opens up huge opportunities for dentistry. And I touched on it before, and I'll labour the point again. The good that people can do for their patients is immense. The life changes, whether it's career, whether it's social, whatever it is. There's some immensely satisfying work that can be done with patients, and I think that's so rewarding. And I hope people don't lose sight of that in the midst of all of the fog at the moment.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that's been an ongoing concern for many people, hasn't it? Kind of disillusionment and walking away from the profession and thinking that there isn't anything left for them in there, particularly among DCPs. I think dental nurses in particular feel that they can sort of have a better work-life balance and better income in a job that doesn't even require any kind of training or skills. And that's not to kind of shoot down the other jobs, but it's just to show a lot of them feel that it isn't worth the stress, so.
Well, you can only have sympathy with that. Yeah, I mean, you go to somewhere where you don't need to do the CPD hours, where you don't have to wear the protective gear. But also where you potentially get paid more. And I think that's one of the challenges that actually practices can. It's possible to create a brilliant career path for dental nurses and DCPs in the wider sense. To keep them motivated, to keep them developing, keep them growing. It takes money, and I think that's the challenge in a world of rising costs at the moment. Trying to keep pace with that is difficult, and again, very difficult when you've got a capped income. If you move outside of that, you've got more freedom to pass those additional costs on to patients and to invest in your team. But if you're in the NHS, it's very, very difficult to do at the moment, I think, and I think that's why it's hard for me to see how this sort of trickle that's become a stream that's about to turn into a river of people leaving the NHS it's only at least for the next 12, 24 months. I can't see it slowing down. Yes, the recession will make people think carefully, but I can't see it slowing down, if only because it's uneconomic to remain in the NHS for many people.
Well, that's what I was about to ask. I think I started this conversation with a big question for you. I'm going to end it with a big question for you as well. What are your predictions then, looking forward to 2023? Off the top of your head, maybe 3 things that you think we will see within dentistry next year or over the next couple of years, as you just said.
I think I'm going to start with something that I haven't mentioned so far, which I think has been an interesting feature, which is about practice ownership. It's going to be a really interesting year, I think, for practice ownership. We've obviously seen quite a shift towards groups and corporates. And certainly some research that we did earlier this year would suggest that the perception of the profession is that that's the way that practice ownership is going to continue to go. So, it could be within the next 5 years as much as as many as 2/3 of practices are owned by a corporate or a group of some description. Now, I'm not entirely sure that's the case, and I think next year will give us some really big clues as to the momentum that that shift to corporate world has got. I also think, though, that within that, because of these opportunities for private squats and things, practice ownership will be something to really keep an eye on. I think there could be there's the potential for more energy being injected into the independent ownership of practices, and it won't just bolt to corporate. So I think that would be an interesting one to watch. I touched on it already, but I see the supply and demand imbalance continuing. I think the recession will have an impact on the demand for straighter, whiter teeth, but I think that people will still value their oral health enough that there will still not be enough clinical hours available. And that means that there will be a continued competition for whether it's dental nurses or whether it's dental associates. And that is going to make remaining within the NHS trickier and trickier and trickier, especially in the face of rising energy bills and rising dental material bills and all of that sort of thing that affects dentistry specifically. Yeah. So I think that will inevitably lead to a move towards the private sector, and that, as I indicated earlier, will gather pace. I think the government will find it hard to ignore that. I think they will need to take some steps. I am pretty confident we'll see some moves afoot to bring in more overseas dentists and to find ways of fast tracking them into the UK dental landscape. And I am sure they'll continue to persevere with skill mix related solutions like the better use of therapists and hygienists. Again, I don't think that's a quick fix. I think it's an entirely appropriate thing to do. But I think we'll see more positive moves in that sense coming up next year. But yeah, I mean, I think politically it'll be really interesting because there's some big challenges that government has got to wrestle with, and I think we'll start getting some big clues next year as to what the longer term future for NHS dentistry will be. Yeah.
Absolutely, and hopefully there will be some answers for people as well, because I think that's been there's sort of overdue, aren't we? Some communication on that side of things. So
yeah, we are, and yeah. I mean, you touch on communication there. I think what I'd love to see, but I suspect I won't see, is better communication with the profession, better engagement with the profession. I know they're setting up focus groups and that kind of thing, but we've been, as I did a webinar earlier this week actually, and someone who was watching chipped in with an observation about Greta Thunberg, and saying when it comes to contract reform, it's just more blah blah blah. And I think that's what we need to see is less blah blah blah, more definitive action and proper engagement. So, you know, you can remain optimistic about that, because I, for one, despite the commercial agenda I have, don't want to see NHS dentistry disintegrate. I am anxious about what happens to oral health inequality. I'm particularly anxious about what happens to the working poor, because they could get squeezed out in this move towards private dentistry. So I really hope we get some concrete positive steps to address the most vulnerable in society, because right now it's not looking that great.
Well, you made a really good point earlier, which is that there is definitely more of an awareness of oral health, I think, in national headlines among the public, which I think is vital for a better understanding of what is going on within dentistry, and that kind of the frustration of people not being able to get an NHS appointment, for example, needs to lie with the powers above rather than the dentists themselves. And I think these kinds of messages are getting across effectively to more people as time goes on. So fingers crossed that continues, and we everybody comes out the other side. But thank you so much. I mean,
the only thing I would.
Sorry, go on, carry on.
Sorry, Gary. I was just going to say that one of the things that frustrates me quite a bit is that the NHS dental budget at the moment is not always, but too often, spent on the wrong people. And the 50% of the population that don't go, a lot of them are the 50% of the population that probably really need NHS dentistry, either because they can't afford it, or because they don't know how to navigate the system, or there's various barriers that are in the way of them accessing dentistry, and we need to find ways of reaching them. But I think that will require a reprioritization. So yes, you're right. A lot of people have, and you know, I said it earlier on, they have demonstrated the priority they attach to their oral health. But there's a chunk of society out there that haven't done that, and we need to find ways of engaging them.
It's education, isn't it? Education is key, I think, in this, and it's just one of the many things that need to be done better, I think, in order for this kind of issue that is ongoing to kind of not come to a conclusion, but kind of be effectively tackled, I guess, rather than just prolonged as it has been so far. But
yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today. There's some really good points made there, and I think this has been a really a valuable conversation to have at this point in the year. You know, looking back and looking forward, and hopefully, 2023 will be a positive place in dentistry more than negative.
Yeah, absolutely. No, well, thank you very much for the opportunity to chat with you, Gabby.
Thank you.